Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Just one, Mr. President. Your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 814 to select file with E&R amendments. That's all I have this morning, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Vargas would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Teresa Hatcher of Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Will members please find their seat for final reading?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 683, Senator Conrad would move to recommit the bill to the Transportation Telecommunications Committee via MO 163.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open.
Good morning, colleagues. Hope everybody had a restful weekend after this beautiful Nebraska weather that we had a chance to enjoy and our time away from our important work together as we head into the final stretch. But just to refresh the body's recollection, these were protective amendments or motions that were filed on a host of different pieces of legislation in response to the rule change that the body decided to adopt earlier this session, foregoing public hearing and in an attempt to stifle debate and dissent. So I haven't yet decided exactly whether or not I'm going to push this motion to a vote this morning, but I do know that Senator Bostar is very interested in ensuring that there's robust debate on a substantive amendment that he has filed. And I do know that different members wanted to weigh in on that particular amendment and then the bill as a whole. So I anticipate we will have some very good debate this morning on final reading on this critical bill emanating from the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of motion 163 to recommit to committee. As I have stated on previous rounds of debate with LB 683, I oppose LB 683. I have concerns over taking away this authority from the Public Service Commission and giving it to the governor's office. I know that there are those that believe that the broadband will not be defined as a common carrier, but it currently is undefined. It's not defined as a common carrier or not a common carrier. And I find that very concerning that we might be doing something that could potentially be unconstitutional. And I think that we should take more caution in that. I also don't think that it is imperative that we do this at this time. The Public Service Commission is already working with the Department of Transportation on the BEAD program, and we have the opportunity to let that continue through the granting process, and then we could revisit this in the coming biennium. But right now, I feel that it is a manufactured emergency, and we should be taking more time and care prior to entering into making this very enormous shift. Additionally, I have the concern over the fact that we have added language that gives the governor carte blanche authority over the money, and really we've seceded our own authority to the governor when it comes to managing the finances of the state. So I would ask that this body reconsider the motion to recommit to committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to close.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I appreciate Senator Kavanaugh's comments, and I will withdraw my motion.
Motion's withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Senator Bostar would move to return LB 683 to select file for specific amendment, that amendment being AM 1301.
Senator Bostar, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. AM 1301 would amend my bill LB 63, which was amended into LB 683, the Transportation Telecommunications Committee priority package on select file. And just to refresh the body's recollection of what that bill was, it had a few components. It stipulated that the state would restrict access to Nebraska Universal Service Fund funding, as well as Broadband Bridge Act funding for telecommunications companies that utilized equipment that posed a threat to our national security. It also included language that would eliminate permitting requirements for telecommunications companies that sought to replace that equipment that was deemed to pose a threat to national security. And that definition, by the way, of what does and doesn't pose that threat, in the legislation, we are citing federal FCC regs in that regard. And then finally, the bill created reporting and certification requirements to ensure that we have an accurate picture of where this equipment is in the state of Nebraska and how it's being utilized. So when we attached the bill to the committee priority on select file, we did so with a 2025 effective date, an enactment date. And this amendment would simply have the legislation enact immediately. That's what this does. There's a few reasons for that. One is actually that when this bill was kicked out of committee, and it was kicked out of committee with 7 yeses, no nos, 1 absent, the committee attached a committee amendment to the bill, which actually did this, made it enact immediately. So in some regard, what this amendment on the board in front of you would do is it would have the legislation contained within the committee package match what the committee voted out on to general file. Additionally, this is an effort to recognize the fact that we don't really have time to have this equipment removed from the state of Nebraska. And there has been a significant amount of time available to those utilizing it to take corrective action. And there can be debate about whether or not enough effort has been put into that. But one thing that I really don't find much debate about when I speak to folks about this topic is that resolution must happen immediately. The Department of Defense has made clear that China will be evaluating whether or not it has the strategic readiness in about 2025 on whether or not it will invade Taiwan, start a war. And part of that analysis involves an assessment of what influence the nation of China has within the United States and what ability the nation of China has within the United States to create, we'll call it, distractions for us. Because the biggest hindrance to the invasion of Taiwan is the potential reaction from the United States. And so if that assessment by China is happening in 2025, we surely cannot wait until 2025 before we create the incentive environment necessary to have this equipment removed immediately. Colleagues, this isn't the time for timidity when it comes to this issue. I appreciate all the conversations I've had regarding this with, well, just about every member of the body. I would encourage your green vote to return select file, to amend the legislation, and then to advance back to final reading. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. I rise in opposition to AM 1301. Senator Bostar may have spoken with almost everyone. He certainly did not speak with me. When this bill, LB 683, was on select file, I had numerous amendments and motions pending, and I spoke with Senator Bostar about adopting his bill onto LB 683, and I was definitely an obstacle at that point in time. I removed the obstacle so that Senator Bostar could amend his bill onto LB 683, and even discussed with him at that time the delayed implementation being the reason for that. Senator Bostar knows that, as well as everyone who was here that day listening to floor debate. I'm disappointed that he would bring this amendment without even discussing it with me. I'm disappointed that it was scheduled. It shows me that I can't trust people when they make a deal with me. This is unnecessary to move this timeline up, and it is going to cost the people in the communities where this equipment is access to service. Because if we are denying access to the USF funds immediately, we're removing an incentive for companies that, in Senator Decay's district, it's the only company. And I'm sure that's the same with several others of you. So I oppose this amendment because I don't think it's necessary. I also oppose it because of how it was handled. I think it shows a great deal of disrespect to the process, and certainly a complete lack of respect for a relationship with me. So there it is. I don't care enough. I'm going to take this bill to 2 hours. I don't care enough about blocking this amendment. You all can do what you want to do. It needs 25 votes to get adopted. And you'll show me. You show me if you think honoring deals is important or not. If you vote for the amendment, don't come talk to me about anything else. Don't ask me to step aside on things because you can't be trusted. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. And I appreciate Senator Bostar's additional information in regards to the substantive reasons for why he brought forward this amendment to change the time frame with the prohibition on the underlying subsidies. But since I'm not a member of the Telecommunications Committee, and since we're going to be here together for 2 hours, I did want to lift some substantive questions for perhaps the members that do serve on that committee. And I see Senator Moser is moving his way around and might be able to help to make a clear record in regards to some of these issues due to his leadership now as chair of the committee. But I know that we touched upon this a bit in previous rounds of debate, and I had a chance to review some of the corresponding media stories in February of this year when this issue was brought forward by Senator Bostar, Congressman Flood, and then Senator Geist. But I was just hoping that perhaps we could have a little bit more clarity about where exactly this issue emanated from, whether or not there were other models in state law or from our sister states that utilized a similar solution to the national security challenges which seem to be underlying the measure, and just a little bit better and clearer understanding of a couple of things, I guess. First being, of course, national security is national security, and we need to ensure that we have a clear, singular national policy in regards to protecting America's interests at home and abroad, and particularly with nefarious or bad actors that seek to undermine our best interests. Now, in a system of federalism, of course, we at the state level could perhaps bring forward different policies or proposals that may complement that national security prerogative, which is singularly at the federal level. But I do want to make sure anytime that we touch upon issues like this that really strike at the heart of federalism. And it's clear that, of course, the federal government is occupying the field when it comes to our national security interests. Whether or not that this would be aligned with our stated national security goals, whether or not anybody who is meeting out our national security goals has weighed in on to whether or not this is a prudent solution to address our concerns about China. And then just the final question would be, of course, since this only allows for a prohibition on the utilization of some funds, of course, there could be equipment that might be out there that would not touch upon the utilization of the funds perhaps, and that would leave that area, I guess, open to utilization of equipment from this company that we are looking at or dealing with. The final question that I would just pose for the record is, I saw that there was a significant amount of attention paid in previous rounds of debate and in the corresponding media articles for when this issue was brought forward by Senator Bostar, Congressman Flood, and Senator Geist in regards to a specific company that they were concerned about. And I just wanted to see if anybody had a chance to vet whether or not our prohibition against special legislation might apply to a foreign entity, and if so, whether or not if this measure is about a singular company, whether or not this solution would be able to overcome our special legislation prohibition. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Moser, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I don't have answers to every question that Senator Conrad asked. Possibly Senator Bostar might be the better person to answer some of those questions. In the discussion of this bill, some of the lobbyists were talking to members of the committee and to Senator Bostar about the bill, and that's how the date got set to 2025. They were going to give them more time because they were supposedly working diligently on this, trying to get this equipment replaced, and we were supposed to take them at their word, is that they were working diligently to get this equipment replaced. Well, then a subsequent installation came and went, and it appears that what they were trying to tell us about their due diligence to get rid of this equipment was not true. So that's, I think, the impetus to this motion to make this happen more immediately rather than waiting a couple of years. Some of the situations, some of the evidence that evolved happened after the deal to remove motions and to allow Senator Bostar's motion to come to a vote. So I support 683, of course. I support Bostar's motion to take it to select file so we can add this amendment. I consider it to be a friendly amendment. I think it's a matter of urgency that we address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief here. I just want to rise in support of LB 683 and the amendment being offered by Senator Bostar, opposed to AM 1301 to return to select, support returning it to select file. I think when we look at this particular issue, originally I felt that it was appropriate to give the additional time. There is one company right now in Nebraska that we know of who is using this Chinese equipment that the federal government has made very clear that needs to be eliminated nationwide. This particular company has continued, there's one company that's continued to use it. We were, as Senator Mosier had indicated, we had indications that they were making a diligent effort to remove the equipment, then learned as recently as a year ago that they replaced a tower where they could have put up new equipment that would have been equipment that would be acceptable, and chose to put the same equipment back up again. So when you don't act in good faith, then it's time to take other action. I do believe, although I'm not an attorney, I feel like over the years as a banker, I've paid for enough attorneys that I feel like I should be an honorary attorney, even though I don't have the degree. But I can tell you that it seems to me that this is a restriction of any company out there of using this equipment, so it would not be special legislation per se, even though there's only one that we know of as using the equipment. Of course, anyone could go out and start putting the equipment up. So this would ban anyone who's putting that equipment up and using that equipment in the state of Nebraska from having access to these funds. And rather than waiting until 2025, this amendment's pulling that date back and making it immediate. As soon as that equipment's eliminated, then you once again would have access to the funds. That's what we're doing. This particular company does operate towers in western Nebraska. That's why I was concerned initially about taking this step, because obviously I want to see more cellular service in the 3rd District and in western part of the state. However, at the end of the day, if you're not making a concerted effort to come into compliance with what the federal government's requiring, if you're not making efforts to truly make this happen, then I think this step is necessary. I do believe there are other companies who can fill in the gap, and quite honestly, I'm not certain that they will stop putting up new towers, even if this is banned. But nonetheless, I think it's inappropriate for the state of Nebraska to be providing subsidy to a company that wants to continue to use this equipment that will be banned nationwide. So with that, I am in support of Senator Bostar's amendment, would encourage a green vote to return to select file for a specific amendment, and then vote for the underlying bill, LB 683. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Senator Bostar and I have had a conversation about bringing it back for this specific amendment, and I appreciate the conversation I had. I was wondering if Senator Bostar yield to a question or two.
Senator Bostar, will you yield to a question?
Yes, of course.
Senator Bostar, thank you for bringing this to our attention. So currently, whatever equipment is on that tower, you're not forcing them to take that equipment down and replace it immediately. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So anyone who has this service will continue to have that because you're not disrupting their service to any of their clients.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We are simply restricting access to USF funds and Broadband Bridge Act funds, which are programs the state utilizes to subsidize the expansion of networks. So
Very good.
this won't impact current service.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering those.
Thank you.
That's exactly what we had discussed earlier off of the mic, and Senator Bostar correctly described it just then. I am in favor of bringing it back for an amendment and then supporting 683. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Bostar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that have come up. So one being what our role is to address some of this. And while I absolutely do agree and believe that it is the federal government's primary responsibility to handle issues of national security, I think it's everyone's job. I think it's our job here too. And if there are actions that we can take here to enhance the security of the United States, to protect Nebraskans, we would be foolish not to do it. And also to address the question of whether or not this is aligned with a broader strategy implemented by our federal partners. The answer to that is absolutely. We've been working closely with our federal partners, Congressional, Department of Defense, Federal Communications Commission. They are all aware of what's happening here. They are all absolutely on board with what's happening here. As far as what other states have done, we will be a little bit of a leader in this field. To some extent, though, that makes sense because we have some unique risks here in Nebraska. One of the reasons why there is such a large amount of telecommunications equipment that is actively threatening the security of our nation, why there's so much of it here in Nebraska, is because we have defense assets here in Nebraska that very few states have. And they are, we'll just say, of interest to our national adversaries. Even though we are a leader in this, we won't be on our own for long. The amount of interest that I have received, the number of questions from other states and other state lawmakers have posed to different partners in this endeavor is really encouraging. I think we will quickly see other states follow our lead. That's a good thing. With that, I know that there's a lot of other questions that were posed by Senator Conrad. I don't remember them all. So Senator Conrad, would you yield to a question?
Senator Conrad, will you yield to a question?
Yes, of course.
Senator Conrad, could you remind me of some other questions that you had?
Yes, sorry, and it's a little challenging to not be able to have the organic movement on the floor while we're in final reading, but I was just, the questions posed were where the idea for the legislation emanated from, whether or not there were other models from our sister states, and then whether or not we had any feedback from those that are leading our national security efforts as to whether or not this was complementary to those goals.
Yep, I think I've answered a few of those. As far as where it emanated, this actually came from, as you've, I think someone identified, this came from
1 minute.
Federal delegation. No, there aren't other states doing this exactly yet, but that will soon happen, I'm sure of it. And all of our federal partners on the legislative side and the executive side are aware of this and are encouraged by the steps we are taking here.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I think the other question I posed was in regards to special legislation, I guess, for targeting the foreign entity, and then, of course, the one carrier in Nebraska, and that would be subject to this prohibition.
Yeah, this came up on select file, and I know we're about to run out of time, but I'll just add that we believe there's one company in Nebraska. We don't know that to be sure. That's part of what this bill will help uncover, as well as it is an open class. Other companies can take the equipment that's already in existence and put it on a tower, and then they would fall into this category as well. So we're running out of time, but I hope that.
Yes, thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Decay, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the motion to return LB 683 to select file. I appreciate what Senator Bostar is trying to do and agree we need to get any remaining equipment off the towers in our state as soon as possible. This equipment represents a pressing national security threat. For example, studies by the U.S. military and other agencies have found that this equipment is capable of capturing and potentially disrupting highly restrictive airways used by the military specifically, and I'm not going to name all the areas that it could impact, but I would say I'm sure others can explain this better than I can, Senator Bostar being one. But in short, this gets into some of the most sensitive missions of our military does. We are at risk of China having a potential window into our nuclear arsenal, an ability to potentially disrupt our military communications, and a backdoor tap into our commercial cell traffic. I believe the work of removing the Chinese equipment off of our telecommunications infrastructure is a priority and needed to be done yesterday. I understand these concerns with potential impact in the deployment of broadband and cellular service in the state, especially in greater Nebraska. What is being done here is not intended to result in an interruption of service. What this amendment does, it speeds up the timeline to get the equipment and other Chinese telecommunications equipment off of Nebraska cell towers and gets its equipment swapped out with something more secure. I have had a conversation with Senator Kavanaugh, and at that time, the conversation, I was supportive of her opposition. But since then, pertinent information came forward that wasn't being done in a favorable timeline, and they could have used to change out their equipment and didn't get serious about it until their feet were in the fire. This won't restrict them from building and maintaining towers within their company. All it does is help put the pressure on them to start eliminating this equipment from our towers immediately. The situation before us represents a critical national security concern in the state that needs to be addressed. I appreciate Senator Bostar's work on this issue, and again, want to reiterate my support for his amendment. I would urge the body to vote in favor of moving LB 683 back to select file, and I would yield the remainder of my time to Senator Bostar if he wants it.
Senator Bostar, that's 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Takei. I sort of rushed through the ending of that conversation I was having with Senator Conrad on the floor as we were running out of time. So to spend just another minute on that, we had a robust discussion about special legislation when we were amending LB 63 into LB 683 on select file. The reality is we don't know with certainty who all is using this equipment. That is one of the things that this legislation seeks to address. Even if there is only one company currently utilizing the equipment, that in and of itself doesn't really mean anything when it comes to special legislation. Because to take a step back, there's currently an importation ban on the equipment, and you can't use federal funds to buy it or install it. However, a lot of it is still here. We have seen this equipment get moved around and put on new towers as recently as September of last year. So it isn't impossible for any company to acquire these radios, it's the bulk of the equipment in question, and install them on towers. So for that reason, this is an open class, and I don't have any concerns with, or I'm not worried about special legislation being a challenge here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Senator Bostar, for sharing your perspective in regards to some of the substantive questions that I posed this morning that we've had a chance to at least touch upon in prior rounds of debate. The other piece that I just wanted to follow up on was in regards to a couple of matters. And reading the media reports from the committee level, I saw my friend Senator Brandt posed I thought a very interesting question at the committee level that about the contours of this specific solution, which is a prohibition on the utilization of funds. And he asked, which I think bears repeating, wouldn't it be better to authorize the utilization of these funds to help companies buy American or to replace or reinstall equipment that we had more confidence in regards to, of course, our telecommunications needs and our national security needs. So I just wanted to lift that up as an alternative solution, which I thought was interesting and important and perhaps might need to be explored into the future. The other questions I just had were more practical in regards to how this measure might work. Is there intended to be any sort of clawback provisions for prior grants of these funds that may have gone to equipment that would, in essence, now contradict our public policy? Is there any sort of concern brought forward by the companies that would risk liability to the state in regards to interruption of contract? And then finally, my ears really perked up when I heard the exchange with Senator Bostar and Senator Erdman, which I thought was instructive. Definitely good to know that there won't be an interruption of service, which is really important, as we know that many people already struggle with connectivity and ensuring strong cell service in greater Nebraska. But that also kind of, on the flip side of that coin, kind of got me thinking, if there's not going to be any interruptions of service, then what does happen in terms of the existing structures? And then if this measure is adopted in an immediate sense, what is our ongoing obligations in regards to oversight, to ensuring a swift timeline for removal, swift replacement? Is there any additional tracking? Will that be taken up in a broad sense by the oversight of the Telecommunications Committee? So it does seem to me that there have been a host of actions taken by the Biden administration on the federal level to address this very issue, and perhaps this can indeed complement that our appropriate role in regards to national security. But colleagues, let me be very frank. I have a great deal of admiration and respect for Congressman Flood. We serve together. We maintain a warm personal relationship and a constructive working relationship. And I'm glad that we've had the chance to work together on so many different issues. But what I'm not interested in is having this body engage in some sort of political battle between a congressman and the Biden administration because they want to talk about who's toughest on China. That part is not interesting to me. If that is in any way part of the underlying impetus for this bill, I think that we should be candid about that. If that's not on the table, I take everybody at their word and think that perhaps this could be one way to address our shared national security interests. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to give you a glimpse of life from District 48, where we do have the biggest guns in the world, and we have more of them than anywhere else in the United States. We'll be one of 3 missile fields addressing what is the conversion from the Minuteman III to the Sentinel system over the next many years. In our neck of the woods, it's not often that someone comes up to your door, knocks, and then offers you many multiples of what your farm or ranch is worth in cash. That has happened a few times. Local law enforcement, the FBI, the Department of Defense are aware of these things. Thankfully, we have patriots out in western Nebraska, and the reason we know about these things is because they turned down the money and reported them. And so the threats are real. It's fascinating when local farmers and ranchers feel the weight of international decisions and progress that's being made when it comes to national defense. But that's the reality of what our folks are dealing with where I am from. And so just wanted to let you know that that's an ongoing thing. Those discussions, by the way, with those 3-letter organizations and so forth, happen every week between our office and people who have to make and wrestle with those decisions on a daily basis. So just wanted to give you a glimpse into what it's like to be in Kimball, Banner, Scottsbluff County. But thank you, Mr. President. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Bostar if he would like it.
Thank you, Senator Hardin. Senator Bostar, that's 3 minutes. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that Senator Bostar please yield to a question. Is he still on the floor? He's not on the floor. All right. So perhaps when he comes back to the floor, he can answer a few questions. I'm not really hearing much about what happened in December of last year when the Biden administration barred sales and imports of any new equipment that would pose any unacceptable risks to national security. During that time, they highlighted 5 companies, I think 4 from China and 1 from Russia. And I noted that one of those companies is one of the companies that we're saying, well, maybe they are here or not here in Nebraska. And I see that Senator Bostar is back at his mic. I'd ask that he yield for a question, please.
Senator Bostar, will you yield to some questions?
Of course.
Senator Bostar, would you say what role the Biden administration's goals are to prevent the very thing that you say that you want to prevent, how they've come into play when it comes to your bill?
I don't think that I am equipped to fully speak for the Biden administration.
As a policymaker, would you say that you are equipped to utilize federal legislation, federal policy as a foundation for good policy at the state level?
Yes.
Okay. So in any ways, are we duplicating what was done by the Biden administration?
I believe what we are doing complements what was done by the Federal Communications Commission, which their actions in this regard relating to putting restrictions on telecommunications companies and equipment that utilize the technology that we are talking about today. That started before the Biden administration.
And also disallowing those organizations from tapping into any government funds, correct?
Yes, there's a prohibition on the utilization of the federal Universal Service Fund for the purpose of acquiring any of the equipment that has been deemed a national security risk.
And also for those companies, correct?
Their restrictions are much more focused on equipment and less on companies. The way the National USF Fund works is different than ours. But this is complementary to that effort.
Can you be more specific in how it complements?
Well, as we stand here today, companies that face restrictions nationally and are using equipment that hasn't been determined nationally to pose a threat to our national security are currently able to utilize universal service funds in Nebraska, apply for grants through the Broadband Bridge Act, and operate as business as usual. And this bill would honestly fix that.
So you're saying that it fixes them not being able to get funds from Nebraska?
Correct.
But couldn't we just say no when they apply for those funds?
My
As opposed to
understanding.
having legislation that says, we believe that you're a threat to national security, couldn't we just allow the organization, I don't know if that's going to be falling under the governor's office or not, but
1 minute.
can they just say, no, we aren't going to give you the money because we feel that you're a threat to national security?
Well, currently, the Universal Service Fund distributions are done through the Public Service Commission, so it's not through the governor's office.
Currently.
Right now, in the questions that are posed and evaluated as far as whether or not an application for USF funding should be funded, there is no question of, are you using equipment that compromises the security of our nation? And so we are rectifying that.
But they don't have that ability to do that on their own? Yes or no?
Their provisions are outlined in statute that we set.
Thank you, Senator Bostar.
Thank you, Senator Bostar and Senator Blood. Senator Mosher, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't think we can leave it to the Public Service Commission to set policy on what brands of equipment are used in cell towers. I think that's the job of the legislature. And so I think that's why this bill has come up. I don't think there are any political gains from passing this legislation. I think it's important legislation to pass, and we need to protect our country. I had a discussion probably 5, 6, 8 years ago with one of our one of our senators, not currently serving, about the rise of Korea, China in the manufacture of electronics. And I said, we're giving them all our technology, and they're building VCRs, computers, radios, and everything based on what we've learned. I said, don't we need to protect our technology? And he said, well, he said, America's a leader in technology and will always be the #1 electronics manufacturer and all this rah, rah, rah stuff. And this is an example right here where it's hitting us over the head. We've given this technology to companies that build it cheaper, and they've reverse engineered a lot of the technology, and they've added extra features to it that are surveilling us. And I think this is, maybe it is a suspenders and belt kind of thing where we're doing something that the federal government is also trying to do. But I think it makes sense to not give universal service funds to companies that use this equipment that then is used for surveillance on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosher. Senator DeKay, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too had some of the same concerns that Senator Mosher and Senator Conrad had alluded to earlier. I am a customer of that company, and I don't want undue financial liability to the company. That company also has over 500 towers out there. It takes about 1.5 weeks per crew to change out that equipment on tower. I don't know how many crews they have available, but this is an example of how they could be working on it and have chose not to in the last X amount of years. Senator Jacobson alluded to this. They, up in Norfolk, they had a tower down. They had the new components they could have put on it, change it out, and put it back in the air. They chose not to. They chose to use the existing source of components that were available to them, and they had a chance to change that and be in compliance and show that they are working in good faith with the state of Nebraska to do that. And at that point, they did not do it. We need to grow our cell service in rural Nebraska, but we do not need to do it with the equipment that could put us at risk. And I yield the rest of my time to Senator Bostar if he wants it.
Senator Bostar, that's 3 minutes, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator DeKay. I think I'll just use this time to respond to something else that Senator Conrad had posed as a question, which was whether or not there were some partisan motivations here. And truly, I can't stress this enough. The answer to that is no. This isn't about whether or not President Biden or his administration has done an adequate job of addressing this particular threat. It's also not about whether or not Congress has done an adequate job of addressing this threat. This is about the state of Nebraska doing what it can to protect Nebraskans. The work that has been done on the national level to identify this threat, to analyze it, to sanction it, to raise the alarm about it, has happened over several administrations. It seems more and more like there aren't that many things that both national parties agree on. However, thankfully, this seems to be one of them. President Obama's administration took action on this. President Trump's administration took a lot of action on this. President Biden's administration's taken action on this. regardless of the majority in Congress, Congress has been repeatedly taking action on this. Is there more to do? Of course there is. The gears of government move slow. That's true. I wish it was faster. I wish they had all done more by now. I wish we could do more now. But we're doing what we can.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Hunt has guests in the north balcony, 32 fourth graders from Brownell Talbot in Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Erdman, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate Senator Bostar's explanation of what it is we're trying to do and the national security we're trying to keep. Senator Hardin made a comment about what's happening in his district. My district is adjacent to his, and we have several of those missiles as well. There have been people in my district that are trying to buy ag land with cash. And I'm not talking about a few dollars, I'm talking briefcases full of cash. It's a real threat. And Senator Hardin is correct. Not a lot of people are accepting that. And we do have some patriots out there, and we appreciate that. So what we do here when we're doing dilatory things is we talk about, has any other state done this? Do you know of someone else that has restricted this? So the question is, does any other state have a unicameral? Obviously, the answer is no. So we can be different. We can be the first. So we're indicating that the Biden administration is going to stand up against China, right? With all the dealings the Biden family has with China, I would say we can trust the Biden family to do the right thing for America, right? Not a chance. Not a chance. So I'm not sure why we want to bring this administration's lack of understanding of national security or whatever else it is that they can't remember they did, and put our trust and faith in them to accomplish something to keep us secure and safe. So Senator Bostar, I do appreciate the fact that you've taken this on and that you've brought it to our attention, what needs to be done. And I'm wholeheartedly in support of 1301. And I will also vote for 683. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to be in this room to figure out that a lot of these questions and a lot of these objections are dilatory. Very simple. Let's move on. Let's vote for 1301 and do the things that the people sent us here to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak. This is your last time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. Just wanted to ask more clearly on the record whether or not this solution had been brought forward to the Public Service Commission, whether or not they had failed to act in regards to their authority and jurisdiction in regards to this issue, and just getting a better understanding for the context in terms of how it ended up in the legislature this year, and getting a clearer understanding with how our work corresponds with our colleagues at the Public Service Commission. And of course, we have separate and distinct roles and checks and balances on the work that we carry out together. So I was happy to hear Senator Bostar's comments in regards to some of his thinking in how this substantive measure may or may not interplay with our local, state, or federal political landscape. I guess Senator Erdman's comments speak for themselves in that regard. So I'm glad that we have those on the record. But while we can and should have a robust debate about our place in this world and ensuring that America's interests are paramount. On the one hand, I think about how these issues transcend politics and partisanship, and how that can be a good thing, and how in many instances on the federal level and here in the Nebraska legislature, we really have found ways to find common ground and consensus to join hands on policies that impact our military, that impact our veterans, and that impact our role in terms of national security. I was thinking about Senator Merman's bill that we have later up in the education package, making a broadening for the new Space Force to take advantage of our educational benefits. I know Senator Sanders and Senator Blood and Senator Brewer, Senator Holcroft, Senator Linehan, Senator Day, Senator Aguilar have brought forward a host of different issues during the course of their service to ensure that we are continually updating our public policies to benefit our military and our veterans and our military families, and just kind of thinking through those lenses as well. And I know we have perhaps more work to do on those measures. And I'm hoping that maybe since we have some time together this morning that we might be able to hear a little bit more about some of those other pieces that are out there. So if anyone would be able to weigh in just whether or not this proposal was brought forward to the Public Service Commission and whether or not they failed to act, I think that would be very helpful for the record, and thank all the senators who weighed in this morning, because I think if we're going to have some time together on final reading, it's important that we make it as substantive as possible. And I think the debate has been substantive and helpful in regards to this measure to take us back to select file with a substantive amendment to change the time frame that we discussed earlier in debate on core issues underlying this measure brought forward by Senator Bostar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to ask if Senator Mosier would yield to a question.
Senator Mosier will yield.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Well, Senator Conrad's asked this question on her previous time, but have you spoken with the PSC about this? And has anybody asked them to do this without this legislation?
I did not talk to the PSC personally, but I know that they're aware of what we're doing, and we had a hearing on it. I don't recall if they came to testify or not.
I just spoke with our legal counsel. They did not. They submitted a letter. However, I remember they weren't there, but I guess my question is, even before the hearing, if anybody has at all spoken with the PSC about whether we even need to do this, do they have the authority? It's my understanding that they do have the authority, and if they do have the authority, are we doing this because the PSC is refusing to deny funds?
Well, I was just talking to counsel about this question, and the PSC previously ruled that this equipment should not be used. This bill says you won't be able to apply for money until equipment is removed from the towers where it exists. So this is a little bit of an extension of what the PSC did.
But the PSC currently, if somebody applied for these funds and they had the Huawei equipment, could be denied and likely would be denied use of the funds.
Well, in the case of that Norfolk instance, the equipment went up. So I don't know if the PSC wasn't aware or if they
were those
aren't
universal
objecting to it. I don't know the answer to that.
Were they using universal service funds for that equipment move?
I don't know. First of all, we don't want them to use this equipment anywhere, regardless of whether they're
No,
getting money or not.
I
And-
100% agree.
Okay, and so whether they got money there or not, but it appears that that equipment was reinstalled when, in my opinion, it should not have been. And if this causes them, the whole industry, it's not just, I mean, there's one company who's primarily using this equipment, but it would extend to all companies that they should not use this equipment. And in a
But
matter of,
my question is, do we need to do this? Has anyone talked to the PSC? If the PSC already has the authority to deny the funds, and they already have the authority to deny the funds for this specific reason, has anyone asked them to just do that? Do we really need to legislate this? Do we really need to create another mandate for a different elected body? Is this necessary?
I think this is important to the national security. I think it's
But
something
is it
that we should
necessary to
address.
accomplish
What the PSC
end?
thinks about it is no bearing on what I think about it.
But we're directing them to do something. Shouldn't we know if they're willing to do it without legislation?
We're directing universal service funds not go to companies who install this equipment.
We're directing the PSC. The PSC is the one that has to handle the universal service fund. So shouldn't we have this conversation with the PSC? It's like somebody telling us what to do without asking us if we would just do it. It seems like an odd way to
If they had an
operate.
issue, I think they would have been at the hearing. And I think they have talked privately with members of the committees. Senator Geist was chair at the time, and she may have talked to him. I don't know. She's
1 minute.
Okay, thank you,
not with
Mr.
us, so I can't tell you.
Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Mosier. So that answers my question. No, we haven't asked the PSC if they are willing to deny the universal service funds without us creating more legislation, which is another reason that this feels unnecessary. I think we should be very wary when we make these kinds of statutory changes, especially if the result is to prohibit the use of universal service funds for equipment that is made in China, and we already have a means to do that. Why are we not working with our other elected bodies? Why aren't we working with our partners in the Public Service Commission? They don't oppose it. They don't support it, but they don't oppose it because they can do it. But we should not just pass things just because.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators, friends all. I want to build a little bit on what's been said. After Senator Bostar said that it had to be in state statute, I did do a little research, and apparently Senator Kavanaugh did as well. The PSC actually has broad authority on decisions such as that. So they can literally just say, no, it doesn't have to be in state statute for us to be able to accomplish this. You know, I go back to when Trump was president, and I remember that he had signed a bill into law that provided, I want to say $1 billion to help the small telecom companies to get rid of this equipment. And then as legislation moved forward, as things happened in the federal government actually really let us down, because even though they are pushing, and maybe this is a good time for Senator Flood to listen, as they're pushing these causes, these causes to scare America. And we should be concerned about terrorism, and we should be concerned about China and Russia. I've had a terrorism bill in the past, but I was told that we didn't have to be worried about it in Nebraska, so it never got out of committee. So it's not that I don't believe that terrorism is something that we should always be aware of, especially being next to Offutt Air Force Base where I live. But I do know, too, that the federal government is short in funds by approximately $3.1 billion. So here's an issue that is so important to them that they come to Nebraska and they have press conferences, that they carry the flag, the patriotic flag, and say, okay, we have to be worried about people spying on the United States. But yet, they don't fund this legislation that's so important to them. And now it trickles down to Nebraska, where we're carrying this same flag, which, well, we should. But again, for like the fourth time this year, we are going to push legislation forward that's not necessary. Not because the cause isn't important, not because it's not necessary to keep these companies out of Nebraska, but because the body that we are saying needs to do this can already do this. They can say, no, you can't have these funds. So I wonder, when we keep passing these bills, what's the purpose? Is the purpose for us to show that we are 110% in support of making sure that we do everything we can to prevent terrorism? Mostly, I don't know if it's terrorism. I think it's more about spying. Or are we just feeding into yet another culture war? I just want to make sure that the legislation that we pass is smart legislation and necessary legislation. I think of the hours that we have wasted on the mic this year on bills that we really didn't need to pass to try and make a statement. And I understand in Western Nebraska what the issues are. Senator Jacobson has explained his area and his issues to me multiple times, and the company that we're targeting. And I hear those words. But you know, if the federal government can't even do the rip and replace law properly and fund that properly, when they can't, do you remember the spy balloon at the beginning of the year? We haven't heard boo about that since we shot it down. Sometimes I just wonder if the things that we talk about in this body and the things they talk about in the federal government are really things that are the kitchen table issues, the things that really affect everyday Nebraskans. And if we go down the wrong path and spend time and money on things we don't have to spend time and money on.
1 minute.
So my concern is that, is this a necessary bill when they can literally already say no? Is the purpose more so to scare people into supporting this bill by talking about terrorism? Is the purpose to punish the companies that are ignoring what the federal government has already put into place? And if so, are there other ways we can do this? So I, at this time, I'm not sure that I am in support of Senator Bostar's amendment. And Senator Bostar really never talked to me until I opposed his bill. On an earlier discussion, I know he said he talked to pretty much everybody, and there's 49 of us, and that's a lot of people to talk to. Especially when it comes to things like terrorism and telecommunications, anything having to do with technology, because those are kind of my will well.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Bostar, you're recognized to speak. This is your last time before your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, so let's talk about the Public Service Commission. They could do a lot of things. Every year, they distribute funds to the company, the telecommunications provider, that is utilizing the equipment that is compromising our security. Ultimately, we have statutory authority. Maybe we went to the PSC and said, hey, would you please stop giving money to companies that are doing this? Maybe they say yes, maybe they say no. Public Service Commission board is elected. Maybe they stop. Maybe next election cycle, a new board comes in, different opinion. They start it up again. This is simple. I do not believe the state should be using public funds and giving them to telecommunications companies that are compromising our national security. That's it. We have the authority to do that. That's what we're voting on. Actually, we already voted on that. We all agreed on that. Not all, but the body agreed to do that. Now what we're discussing is, when does it take effect? I think it should take effect immediately. Others can disagree with that. That's fine. But that's it. That's the conversation. I do not want to leave it to another elected body. I don't want to pass the buck when we have the ability to do something now. I think that's our responsibility. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your last time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't agree with this process of doing things. I don't think that it's a good use of our authority, but it's clear that people in this body are going to go with the flow. So that's fine. Making this change goes against the agreement that I had with Senator Bostar. And if we can't honor agreements in this body, I'm not going to make any more agreements in this body. So that's fine. And I know that people have been asking me for an agreement on other bills that are on the agenda today. So please just move on from that. Agreements will not be made if agreements will not be honored. And now I'm just going to switch gears to taking time. So this is in the statute books 86-324 Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund, created, use investment commission powers, administrative fine, transfer to general fund authorized. It's on page 1080 of the book. That is chapters 81, article 15 to 90. I snagged it from up there, so if you're looking for the copy up there, it's here at my desk. The Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund is hereby created. The fund shall provide the assistance necessary to make universal access to telecommunications services available to all persons in the state, consistent with the policies set forth in the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund Act. Only eligible telecommunications companies designated by the commission shall be eligible to receive support to serve high-cost areas from the fund. A telecommunications company that receives such support shall use the support only for the provision, maintenance, and upgrading of facilities and services for which the support is intended. Any such support should be explicit and sufficient to achieve the purpose of the act. 2, notwithstanding the provisions of section 86-124, in addition to other provisions of the act, and to the extent not prohibited by federal law, the commission, A, shall have the authority and power to subject eligible telecommunication companies to service quality, customer service, and billing regulations. Such regulations shall apply only to the extent of any telecommunications services or offerings made by an eligible telecommunications company which are eligible for the support by the fund. The commission shall be reimbursed from the fund for all costs related to drafting, implementing, and enforcing the regulations and other services provided on behalf of customers pursuant to this subdivision. B, shall have authority and power to issue orders carrying out its responsibilities and to review the compliance of any eligible telecommunications company receiving support for continued compliance with any such orders or regulations adopted pursuant to the act. C, may withhold all or a portion of the funds to be distributed from any telecommunication company failing to continue compliance with the commission's orders or regulations. What? Look at that. They could do this already. D, shall require a telecommunications company to contribute to any universal service mechanism established by the commission pursuant to state law. The commission shall require, as reasonably necessary, an annual audit of any telecommunications company to be performed by a third-party certified public accountant to ensure the billing, collection, and remittance of a surcharge for universal service. The cost of any audit required pursuant to this subdivision shall be paid by the telecommunications company being audited. 3E shall require an audit of information provided by a telecommunications company to be performed by a third-party certified public accountant for purposes of calculating universal service fund payments to such telecommunications company. The cost of any audit required pursuant to this subdivision shall be paid by the telecommunications company being audited and may be administratively fined pursuant to section 75-156, any person who violates the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund Act. 3, any money in the fund available for investment shall be invested by the state investment officer pursuant to the Nebraska Capital Expansion Act and the Nebraska State Funds Investment Act. And then 4A, but I think
That's
I'm
your
done.
time,
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. I thought we'd take a few more minutes talking about the issues that Senator Bostar has raised with his bill. I wonder if Senator Bostar would yield to some questions.
Senator Bostar, will you yield to some questions?
Of course.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. The primary way that we're dealing with this on a national level is the rip and replace program. Is that generally correct? The federal rip and replace program?
I think that that is one of the ways we are dealing with this on the national level.
Okay, and can you I just thought the body might want to understand all the measures, and the people of Nebraska might want to understand all the measures that are being taken to work towards this end in addition to your bill. So can you explain the federal rip and replace program?
Yeah, essentially there was money allocated, appropriated by Congress to set aside for the utilization for telecommunications companies to apply for to help financially support their effort to remove, we'll call it compromised equipment, and install safe equipment in their networks.
Do you know if the folks who are using the compromised equipment in Nebraska have applied for that program?
I don't know. I have seen that, so the total sum that was appropriated is not sufficient to fully fund all replacement equipment. So I have seen the company that is currently utilizing bad equipment in Nebraska make comments that affect that it isn't a full reimbursement, but perhaps it's partial. I don't know some of the logistics and mechanics of how that federal program application is done.
Okay, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, should Nebraska, sorry, I'm losing my voice this morning. In addition to your measures, should Nebraska additionally try to provide some funds to help with that rip and replace program to try to speed it along? Do you think that there would be, since we want to get this done as soon as possible, and also at the same time, maintain our district, our communication system in parts of the state that are reliant on these unfortunately bad pieces of equipment, do you think that Nebraska should set up a program to help with the rip and replace?
Well, the senior U.S. Senator for the state of Nebraska, Senator Deb Fischer, has legislation that would allocate more funding for this purpose. So in some ways, Nebraska is pushing for that. Our federal delegation is doing that. My own opinion on this is mixed. On one hand, yes, I think so. Be good to have more money to help make it happen faster. On the other hand, this company ended up in the networks that it did because the telecommunications companies were offered deals that were too good to be true. They're essentially given the equipment for free. Of course, that would raise red flags, but companies chose financials over obvious security concerns, because at that time that this equipment was installed, we had obvious security concerns. And so they've had a strategic financial advantage by having their network supplied by equipment that they basically only had to pay pennies on the dollar for.
So,
1 minute.
okay. So what I'm wondering is if we should, when we return this to select, also consider whether we need to do additional incentives or additional help or even regulatory help in terms of getting these pieces of equipment changed out as quickly as possible, because it would seem to me that we would want to do that. And if we can get that done as quickly as possible, arguably that would be, a step further than what you want to do here. So I understand the company, there's some problematic, I actually am a little concerned about how recently they used this equipment. So anyway, something to think about since we're going to have to return it to select anyway. That's all the questions I have for you, Senator Bostar.
Thank you.
So so this is just something that as we're trying to balance both keeping our networks safe and keeping them.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator DeBoer. And Senator Bostelman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, colleagues. I wanted to talk about a couple things to clarify, perhaps, of the 6+ years being on the Transportation Telecommunications Committee and working with and hearing testimony from and discussing with Public Service Commission commissioners and members themselves. One thing to remember, the PSC functions under our statutory obligation, our statutory directive, if you will. We place in statutory how PSC should function, what they should or should not do. They don't go beyond that realm. So comments have been made, well, maybe they can just decide not to provide funding in this area. Well, that's not what their purpose is, and that's not what their direction is. So currently, the PSC, if there's someone applying for NUSF funding, as long as they qualify, and that would be anyone now currently that does receive NUSF funding for towers or other things. If they currently qualify, they would be have the opportunity to receive that funding. What Senator Bostar is trying to do is what this legislation does is then provides the PSC the ability to say no. Gives them the direction that says that if this person has certain type of equipment that they do not now, they're not qualifying for those funds to be received. And that's any telecom. That's not specific to one or another. And oh, by the way, in January every year, every one of those telecoms has to certify they do not have this equipment on their towers. So that's an important thing to talk about. I want to make sure we put it on the record where we are on the discussion of whether this is the right time or not, the timing of that, the amendment of that. I want to make sure that we understand PSC, how it functions. PSC works under the statutory authority they're given them. They don't go beyond that. What we're doing is giving them the statutory authority to say no in specific circumstances. And every telecom applies to all of them. Any provider provides all of them annually. Annually, they also must certify that they do not have this equipment on or using that equipment. So with that, just want to make sure that we understood that as a body. I think that answers some questions that were raised earlier. I do support the AM and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostelman. Seeing no one else in the queues, Senator Bostar, you're recognized to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Bostelman, for that clarifying information. It is helpful. I think we've mostly covered this, colleagues. We will have, I think after this, more to vote on. We'll return to select for the amendment and then re-advance to final. So, we're not done here today, but so far, thank you all who participated in the dialogue. I appreciate it. Obviously, if anyone else has any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them either on the mic or off. And with that, I would encourage your green vote for AM 1301. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1301. The motion to return. Request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, not voting. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting yes. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, voting yes. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, not voting. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 1A, 41 A's, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the motion to return to select file.
The motion is adopted to return to select file. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Bostar would offer AM 1301.
Senator Bostar, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues, for that vote. I won't delay this any more than necessary. Again, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So page 1081 of the revised statutes, chapters 81, article 15 through 90 is the Universal Service Fund statute. I was on 4A. The state treasurer shall transfer funds from the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund to the general fund upon certification by the Director of Administrative Services that the current cash balances in the general fund and the cash reserve fund are inadequate to meet current obligations. Such certification shall include the dollar amount to be transferred, which shall not exceed the amount by which the general fund and cash reserve fund are inadequate to meet current obligations. The total of such transfers shall not reduce the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund balance below an amount sufficient to meet the obligations on the fund for the next 60 days. Any transfers made pursuant to this subsection shall be reversed upon notifications by the Director of Administrative Services that sufficient funds are available, or on June 30th, 2007, whichever occurs first. B, any transfer under the subsection not reserved within 30 days after the initial transfer shall accrue interest in the amount of 5% annually. Interest shall be calculated beginning on the 31st day after the initial transfer and continue until the transfer is completely reversed. The interest calculated shall be credited to the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund. C, any transfer of funds which has not been reversed as provided in this subsection with accrued interest shall be considered an encumbrance against the general fund. D, this subsection terminates on June 30, 2007. Fund commission powers and duties. This is 86-325. The commission shall determine the standards and procedures contracts with other agencies or private organizations or entities as may be reasonably necessary to effectively develop, implement, and operate. 86-326, fund administrator Duties, telecommunication companies' obligations. The fund may be administered by a neutral third-party administrator. The commission shall oversee the preparation and selection process of the administrator through a request for proposal process established by the commission. If a third-party administrator is selected, the administrator shall serve at the will of the commission. The administrator shall gather the necessary data to estimate fund obligations, notify telecommunications companies of their obligations to the fund, collect and distribute money from the fund in accordance with the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund Act and the rules and regulations established by the commission, and notify the commission of any violations of the act and rules and regulations by telecommunications companies with respect to the fund. The commission shall audit the administrator to ensure the duties are being performed in accordance with the act and its rules and regulations. Any telecommunications company not meeting its obligation to the fund shall not be eligible to receive payments from the fund, shall be subject to administrative penalties to be determined by the commission, and shall be subject to the revocation of any certificate or permit issued pursuant to section 86-128 or any predecessor statute.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. 86-128. I'm going to look and see what that is. -1. No, that's 2. 86-128. 141. So I suppose I could use the computer to do this, but sometimes it's easier to read at these desks. Okay, certificate or permit of convenience and necessity. 1A, and this is on page 1008. To preserve the integrity of a ubiquitous network, to preserve and advance universal service, and to ensure the delivery of essential and emergency telecommunications service.
That's your time, Senator, and you are next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Telecommunications common carriers and telecommunications contract carriers in Nebraska are subject to regulation by the Commission. In addition to the requirements of Section 86-129, a person shall file an application and receive either a certificate of convenience and necessity as a telecommunications common carrier or a permit as a telecommunications contract carrier before such person may, 1, offer any telecommunications service, or 2, construct new telecommunications facilities in or extend existing telecommunications facilities into the territory of another telecommunications company to provide any telecommunications service. The Commission may only issue a certificate of convenience and necessity as a telecommunications common carrier or a permit as a telecommunications contract carrier after due notice and hearing pursuant to Commission rules and regulations. The Commission shall not issue a certificate or a permit to an agency or political subdivision of the state. 2, if a telecommunications company holds a certificate of convenience and necessity as a telecommunications common carrier, it shall not be required to obtain a permit as a telecommunications contract carrier. 3, the Commission may establish such just and reasonable classification of groups in telecommunications common carriers and telecommunications contract carriers, taking into consideration the special nature of the telecommunications service performed by such carriers. The Commission may adopt and promulgate rules, regulations, and requirements to be observed by a carrier so classified or grouped as the Commission deems necessary or desirable and in the public interest. 4, the Commission may waive applicability of subsection 1 of this section as to the provision of the intra-LATA inter-exchange service under rules and regulations applicable to all telecommunication companies providing such inter-exchange service. After such waiver, their certificate or permit for provision of intra-LATA inter-exchange shall be governed by the statutes, rules, and regulations for a certificate or permit for and provisions of inter-LATA inter-exchange services. Okay, and then it goes on to certificates and permits for inter-LATA inter-exchange services, but I'm going to go back to page 1083, which indicated the law that I was looking at. 86-327 Fund Advisory Board. The commission shall oversee and administer, if a third-party administrator is selected, shall administer the fund with the advice of an advisory board appointed by the commission. The number of members on such advisory board shall not be less than 7 and nor more than 9. The composition of the membership of the advisory board shall be determined by the commission and shall include the following representatives. 1 member shall represent the commission. 1 member shall represent elementary and secondary schools. 1 member shall represent libraries. 1 member shall represent rural healthcare providers. 2 members, but not more than 3 members, shall represent telecommunications companies. And 1 member, but not more than 2 members, shall represent the public. The advisory board shall provide recommendations to the commission at the public hearing held pursuant to the Open Meetings Act. The advisory board shall also, on an annual basis, recommend the services to be supported by the fund. So I wonder who's on that commission right now, and if they all are operatives of China, and that's why we need to do this, because they are recommending that we give money to Huawei technology, perhaps. Annual public hearing notice fund level. Annually, the commission shall hold a public hearing to determine the level of the fund necessary to carry out the Nebraska Telecommunications Universal Service Fund Act.
1 minute.
Thank you. The commission shall publish notice of the hearing in at least 1 newspaper or general circulation in the state at least once each week for 2 consecutive weeks before the hearing. After the hearing, the commission shall determine the amount of the fund for the following year, including a reasonable reserve. In the initial year of the fund's operation, the commission shall determine the amount of the fund to be equivalent to the amount which, in the commission's judgment, after careful analysis, is necessary to keep approximately 96% of Nebraska households subscribed to local telecommunications service. In an emergency, as determined by the commission may adjust the level of the fund, but only after a public hearing for such purpose. And then the next is the Nebraska Telephone Assistance Program Commission duties. I'm going to mark that. I did want to go back to certificates and permits of the inter-exchange services, but I'll do that on my next time on the mic. I think I'm just about out of time.
That's your time,
Thank you.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Question.
The question has been called. Do I see 5 hands? I do. The question is, shall debate cease? There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, not voting. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, not voting. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, not voting. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes.
Senators, we'll restart the vote due to an issue up here.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, not voting. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, not voting. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, not voting. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting no. Senator Day, Senator DeBoer, Senator Day, voting no. Senator DeBoer, not voting. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, not voting. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting no. Senator Holleran, not voting. Senator Hansen, Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holdcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Not voting, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting no, Senator Reapy. Not voting, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting no, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting no, Senator Wayne. Voting no, Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 27 ayes, 9 nays, Mr. President, on the cease debate.
Debate does cease. Senator Bostar, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. Please vote green on AM 1301. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. There's been a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk, on the adoption of AM 1301.
Senator Aguilar. Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Not voting, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Not voting, Senator Bosson. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Not voting, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Not voting, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Not voting, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Not voting, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Senator Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Mr. President, the vote is 37 ayes, no nays on the adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for an item.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh would move to reconsider the vote on AM 1301.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I had to switch my vote at the end because I made a mistake. I need to be present, not voting to reconsider a vote, or vote with the majority voting. And I voted no, and I was the only one that voted no. So I had to switch my vote to yes so that I could do my motion to reconsider the vote, which I needed to do in order to continue to take time on this bill. Thank you, Senator Erdman, for calling the question because I was the only one left in the queue. It was my last time in the queue, and that took more time than my 5 minutes. So I appreciate the assist. All right, back to certificates and permits for inter-LATA inter-exchange services. The Commission may use a certificate or permit authorizing any telecommunications company which files an application to offer and provide inter-LATA inter-exchange service. The application shall include such information as required by the rules and regulations of the commission. The commission may, as a precondition to issuing a certificate or permit, A, require the procurement of a performance bond sufficient to cover amounts due or to become due to other telecommunications companies providing access to the local exchange networks for the applicant. And B, require the procurement of a performance bond sufficient to protect any advances or deposits the telecommunications company may collect from its customers and order that such advances or deposits be held in escrow or trust. 2, the commission may deny a certificate or permit to any telecommunications company which A, does not provide the information required by the commission, B, fails to provide a performance bond if required, C, does not possess adequate financial resources to provide the proposed inter-exchange service, or D, does not possess adequate technical competency to provide the proposed inter-exchange service. 3, within 30 days after receiving the application, the commission shall approve a certificate or permit or issue a notice of hearing concerning the application. A hearing is only required to deny an application. Any telecommunications company or its affiliate that has been authorized by the commission to offer an inter-exchange service prior to January 1, 1987 shall continue to have such authority. Such telecommunications company or affiliate need not file a new application to provide the inter-exchange service previously authorized by the commission. Territorial maps. Every telecommunications company in Nebraska shall file with the commission maps of the territory in Nebraska in which the telecommunications company offers local exchange telephone service, and B, amended maps to continually keep current the information shown on the maps. 2, rules and regulations of the commission shall include the style, size, and kind of maps, the information to be shown on such maps, the time and place for filing the maps, and a requirement that the maps be kept current. 3, the commission may revoke or suspend the certificate of convenience and necessity as a telecommunications common carrier or the permit as a telecommunications contract carrier of any telecommunications company who violates this section. Provision of telecommunications services. 86-131, trunk and toll lines, connection requirements. Every telecommunications company shall take the calls or messages coming from any other telecommunications company and switch and connect its equipment so that any telephone message from any point in Nebraska may be delivered to any subscriber served by its telephone exchange or switched through, and so that any message may be passed on to another exchange over such trunk and toll lines as may be available and designated by the exchange or switching station where the call originated, regardless of ownership of such lines. Such telecommunications company shall also take calls from its subscribers and public pay stations and pass such calls through its exchange toward destination and over the lines and routes designated by the person making such telephone call if there are competing lines existing between such points. If the person making the telephone call does not designate a route for which message or no competing lines exist between points of origination and destination, the telecommunications company may, by its operator at originating point, make such designation of route. But calls or messages shall be switched through to destination if the point can be reached by a connecting equipment. Trunk and toll lines consolidation requirements. Whenever any competing telephone plant or exchange has been consolidated with or absorbed by another so that the remaining plant or exchange has a monopoly of or exclusive telephone business of any city or village, the telecommunications company operating the exclusive exchange or plant shall cause all toll and trunk lines formerly terminating in the eliminated exchange to be placed on or connected to its exclusive exchange, shall make and keep such connection in a good faith and efficient manner, and shall maintain an interchange of business with such trunk and or toll lines the same as its own, in a fair and impartial manner upon the terms set forth in this section and sections 86-131, 86-140, and 86-153. During the period intervening between the time when the first subscribers are taken from the eliminating exchange until the time all have been removed, if such period is more than 30 days, a temporary trunk line shall be established between the two exchanges so that calls may come into both exchanges from the trunk or toll lines of the exchange so absorbed or eliminated, and that calls from both exchanges may go over the lines. Exchange abandonment. An existing telephone exchange or central office shall not be abandoned or removed to any other city or village except by the written consent of at least 36% of the subscribers who had rental service contracts with the telecommunications company, which seeks to change service 6 months before an application to change telecommunication service is filed with the commission. The commission shall hold a hearing and issue an order before the change is effective. Discontinuation of service. This is 86-134. No telecommunications company which provides interstate inter-exchange service or basic local exchange service may abandon or otherwise discontinue such service in or to a local exchange area which it serves unless 1, the commission finds upon application and hearing that one or more other telecommunications companies are furnishing comparable telecommunications service to the subscribers in such local exchange area at the time of abandonment, and 2, the telecommunications company discontinuing telecommunications service to such local exchange area. A, notifies its subscribers in the local exchange area in writing of the abandonment, which notice shall be sent at least 30 days prior to the effective date of such abandonment. B, refunds any unused prepaid subscription charges or other unused prepaid charges to each customer in the local exchange area prior to the effective date of the abandonment. And C, prior to the effective date of the abandonment, reimburses its customers in the local exchange area for service charges which its customers incur in obtaining substitute services for another telecommunications company or in lieu thereof, pays other telecommunications companies directly for such service charges on behalf of its customers making changes in their telecommunications service as a result of the abandonment. How much time do I have left, Mr. President?
A minute, 27 seconds.
Thank you. 86-135, Advanced Telecommunications Capability Service Application Notice Commission Considerations. 1, any person may file an application with the commission to obtain advanced telecommunications capability service furnished by a telecommunications company in the local exchange area adjacent to the local exchange area in which the applicant resides. 2, the commission shall serve upon each telecommunications.
1 minute.
Thank you. Telecommunications company directly affected a copy of the application and notice of the hearing at least 30 days prior to hearing on the application, which shall be held if all of the telecommunications companies involved do not consent to the application. 3, if an application for the revision of an exchange service area includes more than one customer in a particular exchange, the commission shall consider the circumstances of each customer and the impact of the obligations of any affected telecommunications company which has not consented to the application. 86-136, commission application approval. I think I'm about out of time, so I'm going to take a sip of water for my next time.
That's your time, Senator, and you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, commission application approval. Upon the completion of the hearing on such an application made pursuant to Section 86-135, if a hearing is required, the commission may grant the application in whole or in part if the evidence establishes the following. 1, that such applicant is not receiving and will not within a reasonable time receive reasonable advanced telecommunications capability service from the telecommunications company which furnishes telecommunications service in the local exchange area in which the applicant resides. 2, that the revision of the exchange service area required to grant the application is economically sound, will not impair the capability of any telecommunications company affected to serve the remaining subscribers in any affected exchanges and will not impose an undue and unreasonable technological or engineering burden on any affected telecommunications company. And 3, that the applicant is willing, and unless waived by the affected telecommunication company, will pay such construction and other costs that and rates as are fair and equitable, and will reimburse the affected telecommunications by the commission. The amount of any payment by the applicant for construction and other costs associated with providing service to the applicant may be negotiated between the applicant and the affected telecommunications company. 86-137, Certificate of Convenience and Necessity. After the commission has lawfully granted an application pursuant to section 86-136, the telecommunications company ordered to provide the advanced telecommunications capability service shall be issued a certificate of convenience and necessity to serve that area added to its local exchange area by the commission if necessary. The commission shall set the date when the service granted shall take effect, and in doing so shall take into consideration any construction or major repair which will be required of the telecommunications company involved. And then 86-139, Scope of Rate Regulation, Rates and Charges. Except as provided in the Nebraska Telecommunications Regulation Act, telecommunications companies shall not be subject to rate regulation by the commission and shall not be subject to provisions as to rates and charges prescribed in sections 75-101, 75 to 75-158. Just going to write that down. Make a note to look up later about rates and charges as prescribed in 75-101 to 75-158 rates and charges. We've got a lot of hours to fill today. May as well do some investigating. Access charge regulation, 86-140. Access charges imposed by telecommunications companies for access to a local exchange network or inter-exchange service shall be negotiated by the telecommunications companies involved. Any affected telecommunications company may apply for a review of such charges by the commission, or the commission may make a motion to review such charges. Upon such application or motion, and unless otherwise agreed to by all parties thereto, the commission shall, upon proper notice, hold and complete a hearing thereon within 90 days of the filing. The commission may, within 60 days after the close of the hearing, enter an order setting access charges which are fair and reasonable. The commission shall set an access charge structure for each local exchange carrier, but may order discounts where there is not available access of equal type and quality for all interchange carriers, except that the commission shall not order access charges which would cause the annual revenue to be realized by the local exchange carrier from an interchange carriers to be less than the annual cost, as determined by the commission based upon evidence received at hearing, incurred, or which will be incurred by the local exchange carrier in providing such access service. Any actions taken pursuant to this subsection shall be subsequently consistent with the federal act and federal actions taken under its authority. 2, reductions made to access charges pursuant to subsection 1 of this section shall be passed on to the customers of inter-exchange service carriers in Nebraska whose payment of charges has been reduced. The commission shall have the power.
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Moser would move to invoke cloture on LB 683 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Moser, for what purpose do you rise?
Cloture and a roll call vote.
And senators, we are on final reading, so please record your presence with your green light prior to the vote. Members, please check in. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, not voting. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, Senator Holleran, Senator Frederickson, not voting. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, not voting. Senator Ibaugh, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, not voting. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, not voting. Senator Riepe, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Vote is 40 yeas, no nays, Mr. President, on the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture is invoked. The first vote is on the motion to reconsider. There's a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting no. Senator Albright, voting no. Senator Arch, not voting. Senator Armendariz, voting no. Senator Ballard, voting no. Senator Blood, voting no. Senator Boston, voting no. Senator Bostar, voting no. Senator Bostelman, voting no. Senator Brandt, voting no. Senator Brewer, voting no. Senator Breezy, voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting no. Senator Conrad, voting no. Senator Day, not voting. Senator DeBoer, voting no. Senator DeKay, voting no. Senator Dorn, voting no. Senator Dover, voting no. Senator Dungan, Senator Erdman, voting no. Senator Frederickson, not voting. Senator Holleran, voting no. Senator Hansen, voting no. Senator Hardin, voting no. Senator Holcroft, voting no. Senator Hughes, voting no. Senator Hunt, not voting. Senator Ibaugh, voting no. Senator Jacobson, voting no. Senator Kauth, voting no. Senator Linehan, voting no. Senator Lippincott, voting no. Senator Lowe, voting no. Senator McDonald, voting no. Senator McKinney, not voting. Senator Mosier, voting no. Senator Merman, voting no. Senator Raybold, not voting. Senator Riepe, voting no. Senator Sanders, voting no. Senator Slama, voting no. Senator Vargas, voting no. Senator Von Gillern, voting no. Senator Walls, voting no. Senator Wayne, voting no. Senator Wishart, voting no. Vote is 1A, 40 nays, Mr. President, on the reconsideration.
The motion to reconsider fails. Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 683 be advanced to ENR for re-engrossing.
There's been a request for a record vote on the advancement. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Boston, Bostar, Bostelman, Brandt, Brewer, Clements, Conrad, DeBoer, Decay, Doran, Dover, Erdman, Holleran, Hanson, Hardin, Holcroft, Hughes, Ibot, Jacobson, Cowth, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, Mosier, Merman, Raybold, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Vargas, Von Gillern, Walls, Wayne, Wishart. Voting no, none. Not voting, Senators Blood, Breezy, Michaela Cavanaugh, Day, Frederickson, Hunt, McKinney, John Kavanaugh, and Duncan. The vote is 40 yeas, 0 nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 683 is advanced for ENR engrossment. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, amendments to be printed. Senator Vargas to LB 705, Senator Mosier to LB 683. And an announcement, the Appropriations Committee will meet at 11:30 under the north balcony. 11:30 under the north balcony. Appropriations. Mr. President, next item, Legislative Bill 282. I have no ENR amendments. Senator Reapy would move to bracket the bill till June 9th, 2023.
Senator Reapy, you're recognized to open on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Business and Labor Committee holds the responsibility for handling the state claims bill. LB 282 and accompanying amendment AM 687 were advanced out of general file unanimously. As a reminder, state claim bills are brought by the state for each year's legislative session and may consist of miscellaneous tort, indemnification, workers' compensation, and state insurance claims. Claims against the state pass through the state risk manager's office within the Department of Administrative Services. The dollar amounts in the state claims bill have been agreed to, settlement or court judgments reviewed and litigated by the Attorney General's office or relevant state agencies, and not determined by me or the Business and Labor Committee. Later, I will discuss AM 1354, 1354, which includes 4 additional claims that have recently become available for approval by the legislature. Thank you, Mr. President. This concludes my opening remarks on LB 282.
Thank you, Senator Reapy. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator Reapy or another member of the Business and Labor Committee might provide some more information, and I don't necessarily need to do an immediate Q&A right now. I don't want to catch you on the spot here and want to give you a chance to look at your files if need be, because I know there's a lot of component parts in the state claims bill, as there always is. But one issue really caught my eye as I was reviewing it, and I know that we're going to have some additional debate on some other matters, but I was wondering if Senator Reapy or members of the committee could provide some more details as to the state claim being paid out to Mr. Jason Ghali. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Senator Reapy maybe intended to withdraw this bracket motion. I'll yield my time to Senator Reapy.
Senator Reapy, you have 4 minutes and 45 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. And yes, I do wish to withdraw the bracket motion.
The motion is withdrawn.
Senator Reapy, I also have a recommit motion. Is it your intent to withdraw that as well?
That is correct. Please withdraw.
In that case, Mr. President, Senator Reapy would move to amend with AM 1354.
Senator Reapy, you're recognized to open on AM 1354.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 1354 includes 4 additional claims that have recently become available for approval by the legislature. Yesterday, the Business and Labor Committee or not yesterday, but last Friday, held a Business and Labor Committee held a public hearing on AM 1354 and LB 282. Representatives from the Attorney General's Office, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Administrative Services discussed each of the 4 claims. No one testified in opposition of this amendment. I will now go through each of the claims in AM 1354. The first is a line of duty claim for $250,000 for John Trumbull, a retired Cambridge fire chief. The second is an indemnification claim for $18,750 for this is a settlement agreement between the State Troopers Association of Nebraska and the state of Nebraska. This is an outstanding issue that's been here for 12 years and now is coming to a settlement resolution. The third, a workers' compensation claim for $25,000 for a state employee working at the Youth Rehabilitation and Treatment Center in Kearney. Finally, the fourth is a contract claim for $5.5 million. This is a settlement agreement between the DHHS and Wipro, an information technology consulting company. Thank you, Mr. President. This concludes my opening for AM 1354.
Thank you, Senator Reapy. Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to amend with FA 96.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really did myself a disservice on time by yielding Senator Reapy time to withdraw because could have spent more time on that previous motion, but I want these lawsuits settled. So even though I am going to take the full 4 hours on this bill, thought it was worth getting the actual amendment up on the board. So we talked about this last week, the Wipro, and just reiterating my concerns this morning about the fact that the money that we're utilizing for this comes from the behavioral health aid. I understand from comments that were made last week by members of the Appropriations Committee, I believe it was the chair of the committee, but I'm not entirely certain, that this was used because it shifted back to the general funds in the mainline budget or the cash transfers budget, I guess, because there was money there. And since this was a healthcare lawsuit, it seemed like a good use of the funds. This is sort of the undercurrent theme of this year's budget is we see money, we take money, and we don't ask too many questions. It's served to be extraordinarily problematic once the bill got to the floor, that all of these different pots of monies were used and appropriated inappropriately. The money in the behavioral health aid, I have so many questions about why there would be enough money in there to transfer to the general funds to pay for this lawsuit. Because we talk about the mental health crisis in this state, and we talk about the significant need for investment. We did a provider rate increase last year. We've got a provider rate increase this year. So are we taking money that was being underutilized, and that's what it sounds like. So why was it being underutilized? And should we not investigate that a little bit further and explore that a little bit further before we take the money? Was it underutilized because it's taking time to build up to that? And if we take that money now and shift it to this lawsuit payment, are we hamstringing our behavioral health investment in the future? And nobody's really answered any questions whatsoever about why the behavioral health aid wasn't utilized, just that it was there, so we took it. I do believe that we should be paying our debts. I do believe that we should pay our settlements, and those should come from the general fund. They should not come from the healthcare behavioral health aid. So Senator Reapy sent out, distributed this morning, a handout. I believe it's about the different lawsuits. And since I'm taking time, I'm going to read them. So the first page is settlement of Wipro versus State of Nebraska claim within AM 1354 to LB 282, page 7, section 8, lines 9 through 14. Well, thank you to Senator Reapy and to the committee staff for putting all that information at the top of the page. I find that extremely helpful so that I can know where to look in the amendment for what I'm looking for. In 2014, Wipro entered into a written contract with the state and specifically DHHS to develop a new Medicaid eligibility and enrollment solution software. Although DHHS initially requested an out-of-the-box solution, it later requested that the software be customized. Ongoing customization and changes in federal law led to changes in scope and several amendments to the contract. In late 2018, following a leadership change in Medicaid long-term care and long-term care, MLTC, the state terminated the contract without cause. The contract's no-cause termination provision obligated the state to pay Wipro for work satisfactorily performed as of the termination date. So this is kind of an interesting thing that makes me think about when we terminated the contract with St. Francis Ministries. We terminated that contract with no fault. Maybe it was also no cause, but it was very clearly stated that it was no fault, that it was a mutual agreement to terminate the contract. And I always found that really fascinating that we did it that way because there was fault. There was significant fault. There was significant malfeasance and deception in the entirety of the contract with St. Francis Ministries. And I always wondered if we were hamstringing ourselves purposefully from pursuing legal recourse. By saying that we were terminating the contract because of no fault, were we saying essentially we found no fault, we just decided to part ways and deprivatize this whole process, and so therefore we're just going to walk away? We still haven't pursued any legal action against St. Francis Ministries for defrauding the state of Nebraska. We know that there are numerous indictments with the FBI against the former CEO and the software company that the state of Nebraska was billed part of the money. There's a significant amount of fraudulent activity that transpired that led to them doing a fraudulent bid, and without our own procurement process doing even the barest of minimum of due diligence, we entered into a contract. And then we terminated that same contract, well, not the same contract, the emergency contract, for no fault. Though there was a lot of fault. And that question will continue to remain with me is, did we terminate for no fault so that we would not investigate? So that we would not pursue legal action? And why? Why would we want to not pursue legal action? What reasoning do we have to not pursue legal action? I think these are really important questions to consider. But back to the summary. How much time do I have, Mr. President?
2 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you. Wipro submitted 3 invoices totaling $15,570,078.05. The first invoice for $4,773,104.28 was for work explicitly delineated in the current written contract at the time of termination. The second invoice for $9,875,852.80 was for work performed pursuant to the state's instructions, but under a contract amendment that had not yet been signed. The third invoice was for $921,000 in ramp down costs incurred by Wipro. The state refused to pay Wipro's invoices. Following the state's refusal, Wipro filed a contract claim and later a lawsuit. The state and Wipro litigated the case extensively. They exchanged thousands of documents and conducted depositions of numerous witnesses from both the state and Wipro. Both sides hired experts to testify about the quality of the work product that Wipro delivered to the state. Wipro's expert provided a report and deposition testimony supporting his opinion that the work described in Wipro's invoices satisfied the state's agreed upon acceptance criteria. Wipro and the state then engaged in formal mediation. At the conclusion of mediation, the parties entered a settlement agreement in which the state agreed to pay Wipro's $5.5 million in exchange for Wipro's dismissing the suit and agreeing to indemnify the state against third-party claims regarding
1 minute.
project. Thank you, Mr. President. The proposed amendment AM 1354 to LB 282 allocates funds to pay this settlement. So this amendment actually allocates us paying the settlement. The budget transfer funds transfers the money from the behavioral health aid fund to the general fund for the purpose of covering these debts. So if one passes and the other doesn't, I think we deal with some complexities. Although actually, I believe if this passes and we don't pass the budget, which of course we're going to pass the budget, but theoretically, if we didn't pass the budget and this passed, then this would come, I believe, just out of the general funds without that transfer of the behavioral health aid, but I don't know for certain. So that will remain a mystery. I see,
That's your time, Senator. And Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I stand against Senator Kavanaugh's floor amendment, but in full support of the amendment and the underlying bill as a member of the Business and Labor Committee. But with that said, I feel since Senator Kavanaugh is taking some time, this is an opportunity to really talk about what I think our taxpayers need to know about our amendment, especially. So part of this amendment, as you heard, was in reference to a 12-year dispute over state trooper salary. This is an example where Nebraska was wrong, where we did something through the legislature actually that was unconstitutional. And instead of our executive branch saying, you're right, we made a mistake, we're going to make sure that we properly address your salary and retirement benefits, we decided that we were going to fight it through the Attorney General's office. And we fought it and we fought it and we fought it for 12 years. So I will give kudos to the current administration for finally settling this state trooper dispute. But I think it's really important that Nebraskans start paying attention to how often over the last 2 decades our executive branch has dug in their heels to fight things that they may knowingly know that they should not be fighting, trying to get the other side to just basically give up. And I think this is a really good example. We talk about all the time about how we support the blue, how we support law enforcement, how the state capitol could not run without the help of our state patrol. But when it comes to giving them their just due, we decided that they didn't have it coming and we were going to fight for it. So while we were fighting for it, that meant the taxpayers had to pay for that fight. For every time we went to court, for every deposition that we had to have, for any type of hearing that we had to have, you get to pay for that. This is also an opportunity for us to talk about why outside of an IT department, we still don't have a real technology department in the state of Nebraska. I've asked multiple times as a state senator why we don't have technology as its own committee, because we don't have a lot of people with keen understandings of technology, and we see that over and over and over again in DHHS. If we go back to Governor Heinemann's time and we look at Access Nebraska and we look at that fiasco, and many of us remember that during that same window of time, there was software that was designed for HHS that was not compatible to the computer system that the staff was using. So basically that was just money that we burned up and never got to utilize for anything that really benefited anybody. This is another good example when the ACA kicked in and we needed software, as you heard, that was specifically about Medicaid eligibility and enrollment. And there was clearly a miscommunication. And because of that, now we are paying millions of dollars on a settlement, which is actually less than what the original bill was. So they saved you some tax dollars there, I guess. But that still doesn't compensate for the staff time, for the time we spent in court. We had to be sued to pay for a bill that we didn't pay because we didn't clearly have a good understanding of what type of software was needed for this Medicaid eligibility. And so again, I stand in support of these amendments, but I really wish that more senators would read the papers that are on their desk that Senator Reapy provided them, because over and over and over again, especially now with term limits, we continue to make the same mistakes. We continue to fight battles to not pay bills where we make mistakes because of our lack of knowledge when it comes to technology.
1 minute.
We continue to have bad technology because we don't know what we're asking for. From the Department of Labor during the COVID crisis, where we paid out false claims to the Russian mafia and to Nigerian crime rings, to what's going on in DHHS yet again. We have to get a better grasp on technology and the role it plays in state government, or we're going to keep being sued and we're going to keep wasting money. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and back in the queue. So the next page in the document from Senator Reapy is Nebraska officials agree to 18.75 million settlement and state trooper dispute. And this was on April 20th, 2023, and updated on May 4th, 2023 from Don Walton, Lincoln Journal-Star. Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers recently announced an $18.75 million settlement of a 12-year dispute over state trooper salary and retirement benefits that impacts 28 years of payroll. The announcement follows on the heels of Governor Jim Pillen's support for a 22% increase in salaries for members of the Nebraska State Patrol. The settlement stems from a lawsuit originally filed in 2011 over increases in the contribution rates state troopers were required to make to the state pension fund. According to the suit, the legislature approved several increases over the years that raised the troopers' pension contribution rate from 8% in the 1990s to 19% by 2011. The suit alleged that the increases were unconstitutional. Joining Hilgers at a press conference, the governor praised the settlement, describing the patrol as the, quote, gold standard of law enforcement and, quote, the safety of Nebraskans as the highest priority. Pillen said he is pleased to get this lawsuit behind us. Hilgers said the settlement will benefit more than 400 current and former members of the patrol and suggested that the governor's budget proposal already has demonstrated his support for troopers by its significant increase in salaries. We have their backs, he said. It's time to put this to bed. It's a morale boost, said Colonel John Bolduc, Superintendent of State Patrol. It's a demonstration of support for troopers, he said, coming from an administration that supports law enforcement and the state patrol. On hand for the press conference were State Senator Robert Clements of Elwood, Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, State Mike McDonald of Omaha, a committee member, Senator Merv Reapy of Ralston, Chairman of Business and Labor, who will shepherd the claims bill through the legislature. Lieutenant Governor Joe Kelly and participants in the lawsuit also attended the event hosted by the Attorney General. Senator Reapy, we should get you a shepherd's stick for shepherding this through the legislature. How much time do I have left?
1 minute, 57 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Reapy also included another article on the Wipro lawsuit. Nebraska settles $15.5 million Wipro lawsuit for $5.5 million. Omaha World Herald from Aaron Bremer on May 4th, 2023. Nebraska settled a lawsuit with India-based technology company Wipro Limited for $5.5 million, about 1/3 of the amount the company sought. Wipro was hired to conduct an $84 million upgrade to the state's Medicaid eligibility and enrollment management system. After the state prematurely ended the contract in late 2018, the company sued for $15.5 million, alleging the state failed to pay it what it were owed
1 minute.
before the contract. Thank you. Was terminated. The work began in 2024 in an effort to bring Nebraska in line with the Affordable Care Act. Prior to Wipro's contract being terminated, the state had paid the company roughly $6 million, according to previous reporting. Bo Patello, General Counsel for the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, said at a hearing on Thursday that the $5.5 million represents the total settlement agreed upon by both state and Wipro officials. The settlement was part of an amendment to Legislative Bill 282, which acts as a regular legislative measure used to appropriate funds for various financial claims made against the state. Overall, the amendment totals more than $26 million. The biggest chunk of that is $18.75 million in a separate settlement that Attorney General Mike Hildress announced 2 weeks ago. It will resolve a 12-year legal
That's your
dispute.
time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hughes announces some guests in the north balcony. Fourth graders from McCool Junction Elementary. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your final time on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Before you're closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The biggest chunk of that $18.75 million and a separate settlement that Attorney General Mike Hildress announced 2 weeks ago. It will resolve a 12-year legal dispute over state trooper salary and retirement benefits. So that's the end of that. It did have, oh no, it's not. Sorry. Turn the page, Senator Kavanaugh. The lawsuit filed by state troopers claimed the legislature approved unconstitutional increases to the troopers' pension contribution rate from 8% in the 1990s to 19% by 2011. The suit was filed in 2011, making it one of the longest lasting litigations in Nebraska history, Hildress said Thursday. He said the lengthy dispute has incurred significant costs to both sides, and some of the troopers who were part of the original lawsuit have since passed away. Even so, he said the settlement will benefit more than 400 current and former members of the patrol and will impact roughly 28 years of patrol. Okay, so thank you again to Senator Reapy and his staff for putting this together. It is helpful when we have amendments like this, especially, this isn't any small thing. It's 2 major lawsuits totaling, what did the article say? $26 million. That's a lot. So it's helpful to be informed. Going back to the budget, I still remain concerned about how we are funding things. The fact that we're transferring money out of behavioral health to pay for this, we have $700 million in the general fund or more. I haven't looked at the green sheet today. 714 million is what is the variance after we if we were to pass the budget bills as they are right now, we'd have $714 million in general funds. And we're taking 5 of that out of the behavioral health account. And I just think that this is poor governance, but if I were to describe the theme of the 2023 Nebraska Legislative Session, it would be poor governance. The theme of this year is poor governance. We do cosmetic things. We pass vanity bills. We're not focused on good public policy. We literally wasted 2 hours this morning on a vanity bill. And this body's fine with that. Like, legitimately, we are on day 74. We have 16 days left, and this body is willing to spend 2 precious hours on a vanity bill. I mean, I'm partly responsible because I stepped aside when people wanted to put packages of bills on general and select file, and that was foolish of me. That was me being a good colleague. I made it easier for this body to be lazy about how they're doing their work. So I guess now you are at the point where you have 2 hours to just waste on a bill that nobody cares about. So I'm just
1
looking.
minute.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I'm just looking over the green sheet, and I see. I'm trying to figure out. So the green sheet starts to get more in depth as we move along. Once we move the budget, then we start moving A bills, and the green sheet starts to change every day. I'm just not seeing changes yet. See here, we've got the mainline budgets, the deficits, state claims. State claims right now is 200,000. So I guess this would change it. I assume the A bill on this would change it. Let's see here, 282. So if you look at the worksheet, find 282 A bill, see where that is.
That's your time, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Amendment to be printed from Senator Bossman to LB 818. And Senator Brewer would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. We are adjourned.